We're in the knowledge area project procurement management, and let's talk about the process of planned procurement management. When we're planning our project, just as we are planning our, developing our scope, planning our scope, we're developing our schedule, we're developing our budget, we're planning how we're going to do project risk management, we're planning how we're going to maintain quality, we're planning our human resources. As we're planning those things, we're also planning our procurement management. Now let's see what that means. Let's look at the components of the output of planned procurement management, which is the procurement management plan. So we're going to give some thought to types of contracts. Let's use an example that our company, you are the project manager, and your company wants to renovate an office. In fact, there's a whole floor in an office building. You're going to be thinking about what type of contracts are you going to use? Are you going to, with your designer and with your contractor? Or maybe you have more than one designer, maybe you have more than one contractor, you may have a number of contracts. Are you going to use, for the actual renovation, are you going to have fully developed plans and specs so that you can award a fixed price contract to a renovator? Or are you anticipating that there may be a number of surprises when renovating the building, or you may change your mind during the renovation? Maybe you prefer to have a cost reimbursable contract. It all hinges on who is it reasonable to take the cost risk. Should your contractor take the cost risk by being at fixed price, or is it more reasonable for you to take the cost risk and go with cost reimbursable contracts? You're also going to think about centralized or decentralized procurement. Are you, the project manager, going to do the procurement function of going out to the marketplace and then making an award of contracts to your designer and to your renovator? Or is your company telling you that you're the project manager, but you're going to use our procurement, our central procurement department to do those processes for you and with you? As you're doing your procurement planning, you're going to think about your documents. You're going to be trying to select documents such as your request for information, your request for proposal, or request for quotation documents. And probably, rather than try to write these up from scratch, you're probably going to try to find some standard documents that've got clauses that have been developed over the years that you can use. Some of the other documents you're going to be pulling together are the terms and conditions of the contract or purchase order that you expect to award. Do it now during project planning. Don't wait till the time comes when you want to award a purchase order and you realize you have to find terms and conditions to go with it. As you're doing your procurement planning, you're going to outline what your procurement processes are. How are you going to go through the steps of getting internal approval if you need to go out to the marketplace? How are you going to go to the marketplace? How are you going to make a selection? Can you sign the purchase order awarding the $500,000 contract, or does approval of that level of expenditure have to go to somebody else? Think of it in advance while you're doing your project planning so you're not held up during the actual execution of the project. Are there some long lead purchases? Are you going to be purchasing some expensive furniture from Scandinavia that might take 6 months to arrive? If that's the case, you'll want to think about getting on those long lead purchases and making them very early. Does your company already have, know about renovators and interior designers who they've used before, who you already know are qualified, who you can go to with your request for proposal, request for quotation? Are you going to use performance bonds? When you make an award to your renovator, are you going to ask your renovator to get a performance bond? This would mean that a bonding company, it's a bit like an insurance company, but it's not really the same. A bonding company would stand behind your renovator and promise you that if your renovation contractor does not perform according to the contract, that bonding company will come and help you out and will get that work done at the right cost and at the right quality. Well, Everything is a little more complex than that, but that's basically what a performance bond is. And you're going to be, during procurement planning, you're going to do make or buy decisions. For example, well, let's use the example, you're going to renovate the floor of the office building. And maybe clearly you are going to buy the services of the renovation contractor. Your company does not do renovation or construction, so you're not going to do it with your own people. You're going to buy it from the marketplace. But what about design? Maybe in the make or buy decision, maybe you make. In other words, you say, we do have interior designers who work within our company, and we are simply going to do the design ourselves. So make or buy means for a particular item of work, which is doing services or providing a product, you decide, are you going to do it yourself, which is make, or are you going to purchase it outside, which is the buy. Now, this raises a question of how would you decide what to purchase from outside? In fact, I'm going to suggest you might like to pause the video while you give some thought to what are some criteria that would help you decide. So I left with you the make or buy decision. And how will you decide what you're going to purchase from outside? Well, I know that you thought of cost. Which is more cost effective? Can you do it cheaper with your own people, or can you do it cheaper by purchasing from outside? That's not the only criteria. Another criteria might be, is there a competitive environment? Are there a number of suppliers out there who do that work and can be competitive at giving you prices? Maybe you'd like to take advantage of that. Maybe an important consideration, well, I think almost always an important consideration is, what about core competence? Maybe your company, in the case of renovating the office, your company would say, we're not in the business of designing renovations or carrying out renovations. That's not our core competence. Those are services we will always purchase from outside. In the past, I've run a training business in recent years. And we decided at one point that we are not in the business of doing printing and reproduction of course manuals. We would always, on principle, purchase that from printing services. Along with cost, you're going to think about the delivery schedule. If you'd like to buy from outside, can they deliver it fast enough? Or are you in a real hurry for this and you can do it more quickly with your own people? You're going to consider delivery schedule. What about intellectual property and proprietary rights? Maybe you do sophisticated engineering work in, let's say, space robotics, and you're developing a camera for use in a very harsh space environment. And maybe there's a component of that camera that you don't have too much experience in, but there are, so you think, well, maybe we should go to, and we're rather pressed with the people that we have. All our people are busy. Maybe we should subcontract that out to another, to a supplier to ourselves. Well, one thing you're going to consider is, would that involve your supplier learning about your proprietary processes or processes and designs that you would prefer to keep secret? If so, maybe you'll make a point of doing it with your own people inside. Or would it be an advantage that that supplier already has designs and intellectual property that they can bring to your product that you do not have to develop on your own? You know, these sorts of things are going to be part of that decision. Another thing that's a commercial kind of consideration, in a sense, is let's say that in developing this camera for a space environment, you have a contract with your customer, which is, let's say, NASA, the American Space Agency. They've got some terms and conditions in that contract. For example, one term is that it will be fixed price contract, and another term is that upon deployment of this space camera, you promise 10 years of warranty. Can you get the same terms from your supplier? Can you get your supplier to do that subcontracted work on a fixed price to you? And can you get that supplier to also promise a 10-year warranty from the time that you deploy the camera? If you can't, maybe you'll think about doing the work yourselves. That's something else that you're going to consider. So during procurement planning or planned procurement management, you're going to be developing one or more, in fact it could be dozens or even more, procurement statements of work. This was formerly called a contract statement of work, and many organizations would still call it that. And a contract statement of work is describing the contract package in enough detail that your supplier will be able to quote on it and will be able to carry out the work. So it's describing what is the work that you want the supplier to do, and what about schedule and other requirements about it. Now, if we're talking about a procurement statement of work, in this series of video clips, we try to be consistent with terminology from the Project Management Institute. I ask you the question, how does a procurement statement of work, as I have now described it, differ from a project scope statement and a project statement of work? Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, this is entirely arbitrary. It's just semantics. It's just the words that PMI happens to use. And it is true that organizations, your organization, may use some different words. But still, these are the words that we're using, that we're assuming to be used in this series of video clips. So I'd like to give that a bit of thought. You might like to pause this video while you do think about that, and then we'll come back with an answer. So I left you with the question, how does the procurement statement of work differ from a project scope statement and a project statement of work? Well, I bring you back to the generic life cycle that we're assuming in the terminology and processes that we're talking about in this series of video clips. And now, any organization that does project management should be designing their own project management methodology. So their life cycle may look somewhat different than this, but there's going to be some similarities. There probably is something equivalent of initiation phase, a planning phase, and a closure phase. Execution may look different. It may be broken into further phases. So the answer to the question is the project statement of work, the flag at the extreme left of the slide. That's what you get from your customer. That's what you get from your customer that says, we want a space camera. Then the project scope statement is part of the flag, the third flag from the left that says project management plan. Remember that the project management plan contains the project scope statement, which is the scope baseline. It also contains the schedule baseline, that's the approved schedule. It also contains the cost baseline, that's the approved cost, and so on. And the procurement statement of work, our topic here, there could be 0 or 1 or dozens of them at various times during the project. It's what we prepare that we send out to the marketplace to help us purchase a package of goods and services. Just a bit of terminology, but I think it's useful for us all to be on, as they say, the same page. Now, a few definitions leading up to further discussions. First of all, a quotation, a bid, or a tender is an offer that we would receive from potential sellers. And if we use the words quotation, bid, or tender, it's usually on well-defined work. I ask a supplier for a quotation on their widget W123, and we both understand what that is, and they're going to give me a quotation, and I'm probably going to, because I've already asked them, I've already made a technical decision on the product, I'm going to look at their price and delivery time. Or we have a package of construction that we want to award to a construction contractor. Well, we might call that a quotation, a bid, or a tender, and that's the offer from the construction contractor based on our fully designed drawings and specifications. And we're going to select between those construction contractors, mainly on the basis of how much would they charge us as a fixed price and when can they promise to be finished. So with quotations, bids, and tenders, we select by price and delivery time mainly. Now, there's another kind of offer we can get from potential suppliers, and that's a proposal. Now, if it's called a proposal, it's probably where each seller may have a different approach or a different capability or is offering us something different. So I might, as a business, or we in our business might want some improvement in our business processes. I'm purposely addressing this very sort of generally and vaguely. And there's 3 companies out there, IBM and 2 or 3 others, that might have a solution to our problem. It may be quite different solutions. We would call those proposals. And we're not going to evaluate on just price and delivery. We're going to consider a number of other issues too that we'll come back to later in this series of video clips. So in planned procurement management, there are more outputs from that we'll have a look at. There is the request for information. Now, this is optional for your part. You might decide right now that as part of your planning, in 6 months, you're going to go out to the marketplace and ask them for proposals for the design and construction of a hospital. Now, this is a big deal. And it may be smart to let the potential sellers know about it well in advance so that they can be forming joint ventures, they can be getting together, they can be thinking about how they would approach it. So you might like to go out to the marketplace now. Maybe you publish an ad in the newspaper saying, we invite pre-qualification packages from potential sellers. And in fact, you send them a request for information that asks them a bunch of questions, that tells them what you intend to do in 6 months, expresses it in very general terms that you're going to have, that you're going to want a hospital and that you're going to want design and construction and maintenance for 30 years and telling them in general terms what's going to come up, and you ask them if they're interested. So these potential sellers can give you information about themselves to help you select who are you going to go to in 6 months. This is optional. In some cases, you'll find that it's very useful to do this in advance of actually going to the marketplace with your request for proposal. Then there's a request for quotation. A request for quotation is where you go to your supplier and say you want a quotation for the widget WXYZ, or where you go to a construction contractor and say, give me a quotation on, or a bid or a tender for this construction work, or any number of kinds of suppliers where you want a quotation that's mainly going to be judged on price and delivery because the technical scope is very clear. Then a request for proposal is what you're going to prepare to go to the marketplace to ask for a proposal where all the vendors are going to have a different solution. And there's going to be more work on your part at evaluating those. Now, of these procurement documents that we showed on the last slide, there's some good practice. One is, it's recommended that your procurement documents specify the form of response for easy comparative evaluation. In other words, when you go out to the marketplace, tell the vendors in what form you want them to respond. So when they give you the information package or their proposal or their quotation, they're all structured the same, and it makes it easy for you to compare and evaluate between them. That kind of request of giving them the format helps make sure that they all give you a complete and accurate response. By them filling in all the fields, you do in fact get all the information that you want. I've been in a situation where I've had to compare competing proposals, and they're all written differently and structured differently, and very hard to compare. And you also want to make sure that when you go to the marketplace with a request for quotation or a request for proposal, give them the terms and conditions that will be attached to the contract that you will eventually want to sign with one of them. I remember on a number of occasions getting requests for proposal from a company for consulting services. And they're used to asking for design services. And their eventual contract will say, we want you to have professional liability insurance. Well, myself, when doing management consulting, I do that without professional liability insurance. So if you're going to surprise them in the final contract with a requirement for professional liability insurance, it would be better to let them know when you're asking for the quote in the first place, here's the terms and conditions, we will be asking you for liability insurance. Tell them early so that, in my case, I can get back to you and say, I don't have liability insurance, are you willing to accept a proposal without it? And if you say no, then I just say I won't bother to reply. Another output from planned procurement management is the criteria you're going to use to select your vendors. And well, some criteria would be description of the actual companies to help you evaluate them. Some of these criteria will be about what they've included in their proposal. Give a bit of thought as to what those criteria might be. You might like to pause the video and we'll take them up. So I was suggesting you might come up with some source selection criteria, and in fact I have a few to suggest. These probably match many of the ones that you came up with. But for the sellers themselves, the size of the business, the number of projects they do during a year, the number of contracts that they get, their volume in terms of total revenue for the year. What's their production capacity? Do they only do one, are they a company with 2 people and they only do one very small contract at a time? Can they cope with our consulting contract? Or are they a large firm with lots of people and they're able to put a big throughput? That may make a difference. What's their technical capability? Do they have the technical smarts and the skills to perform our work? How have they performed on past contracts with us? Or what do other clients say about them? What about their financial capability? Check their credit reference, for goodness sakes. And these are criteria for the companies. Other criteria are for their proposals themselves. Often in a proposal, a supplier will restate to you what they see your need as. And you may want to be assured that they seem to understand it well. When evaluating proposals, is there a proposal that's going to give you a result that you can operate and maintain cheaper than the other ones? You're not just looking at the cost of getting the project done, you're looking at the overall life cycle cost of the product over its horizon. Are there some risks associated with the proposal or the seller? What about the approach of the seller? How are they going to be approaching the management of the work? And what's their technical approach going to be? Are they willing to offer you warranties on the result of the project? And is there implications in terms of intellectual property rights that should be discussed prior to awarding the contract? Well, this discusses many of the aspects of planning your procurement management.